Academy of Arts and Letters.
Okay, right. Yes, African Ascent, as always, is extremely privileged to bring a continued tradition, introducing my precious to the kind of work that cutting-edge scholars, producers, film directors, movie producers, professors, activists, videographers of all kinds.
America's greatness was not crafted in skyscrapers alone, but on the ground by those who could see what needed to be done. Volunteers who in service stepped forward onto the dust of the moon, the levee in the heartland, the marble steps of a dream. You may ask yourself, where's my moon, my levee, my dream? Well, it's here with you. Step forward. Help renew America at usaservice.org.
Yo, punk!
Oh my God, Jackie just told him a punk. He did not just say that.
Where you from, huh? What? Oh, where you from, huh?
Oh my
Why
God.
is he doing that?
Let's go get him. Let's go get him. Oh my goodness.
That's not needed. Hey, yo, man, it ain't working.
Stop.
it.
Where do
What are you
from?
doing? Like, come on now. Over here, we don't fight like this.
We don't do that.
You
You
don't
gotta
bully.
get
Get
out
out
of
of here.
here.
Get out of here.
We don't want you here.
Stop the bullying. It's not worth it. Someone can get hurt physically or mentally.
It's always a pleasure for African Ascent to come back and it's to introduce some of its distinguished guests. My guest tonight is one of Berkeley's bests. He is an internationally acclaimed composer and conductor whose name is Professor Alan Levines. I hope I have pronounced that lovely name. He has agreed to come to us and share with us everything that he knows about what composers do, about what it means to be a composer, what it means to be a conductor. These are practices that ordinary individuals like me take for granted. But African Ascent had this rare opportunity to bring a guest who does both, who is a conductor and who is also a composer, who will be freely exploring themes and topics with us. My guest comes with a record of having been a student of two famous universities in the country, Stetson College University in Ohio, and of course the great university, University of Pennsylvania itself. In both these universities, he specialized both in the study of comparative literature, which eventually, in a meandering way, brought him to music and to declare himself an accomplished conductor and composer. He has been commissioned by cultural councils from Japan, for example. He's also a recipient of a very distinguished award from the American Academy of Letters and Sciences, I think. I might have probably misdesignated it, but that will do. It is really a privilege then for Afghan Ascent to bring a composer for the first time who would be introducing us both to his musics and who would also be willing to discourse about what he does. Welcome to Afghan Ascent.
Thank you so much, Tedros.
So what I thought we should do is speak about music. We take music for granted. Everybody thinks that they know what music is. I'm sure you observe, because music is a very specialized practice, as a matter of fact. And yet, unless one is very fortunate to be a student, for example, at a place such as Berkeley, that prides itself quite appropriately to be one of the leading, if not the leading, colleges for the study of contemporary music, one doesn't really know what it takes and what it means to be a musician. So perhaps we could talk about music first.
Well, before the program began, I think you asked me to address the question, what is music? So is that what you're getting at this time?
Yes, that's right.
What a loaded question. It's like the question, what is philosophy, probably. There's too many answers, but let's try on a few.
Okay.
I like to start with many of my students answering this question or asking more questions about this question by saying that 100 years ago in Europe or in the United States, in that Euro-American tradition in music, that if you asked scholars and musicians, composers, what is music, they wouldn't all agree, but they would certainly all agree on certain things. They would say, well, music must possess melody, it must possess rhythm, it probably should have harmony, and they may add other things into their definition. In the middle of the 20th century, a composer, an American composer, came along who was, for me, a hero. I think he will perhaps not be remembered for his compositions nearly so much as being a philosopher of music or philosopher of the arts. Not just music, but the arts in general, John Cage. And John Cage's music, in fact, always asked questions, and every piece asked another question. Probably his most famous composition was a piece called 4 minutes and 33 seconds. In that piece, he came to the piano and sat at the piano silently, supposedly silently, for 4 minutes and 33 seconds.
Silently?
He did not play
anything.
the piano. He did nothing.
What was he doing? Looking at the piano?
He was looking at the piano. I haven't seen a video of that performance, but I've seen other people perform the piece. I have performed the piece.
Amazing.
And when I performed the piece, it's in the score, there's 3 movements, each a different length that adds up to 4 minutes and 33 seconds. When I performed the piece, I had a stopwatch on the piano to keep track of the time. And I lifted the lid off of the keys to expose the piano keys, kept track of the time, and then I closed it again at the end of the first movement, then I opened it again and closed it again for the second and for the third movements, and then I was done. When John Cage first presented this piece, it was, of course, for some scandalous to call it music. And it gained the title 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, but John Cage's point is that, in fact, there isn't any silence. The music of that piece is the noise from the audience, which in every performance that I've ever been to, there's not much sound at all at the beginning. In fact, it could be completely silent at the beginning. But invariably, with that much time, with nothing happening on stage, the audience gets restless. And so there is sound. And there's more sound and more sound and more sound from the audience. And actually, interestingly, as the time period comes to a close, the sound, the music, if I could be so bold, from the audience begins to taper off and disappear. So the sound from the audience has something of a shape in each performance. Perhaps John Cage knew something about that particular length of time of sitting and doing supposedly nothing and what it would or would not get from the audience. Or maybe he just had questions, because that's, in fact, seems to be what he most enjoyed, not answers, but questions.
It's remarkable.
But I brought that to the conversation just to say that after John Cage, within the Euro-American musicological world, the answer to the question, what is music, the definition of music, was exploded. It didn't have to have, for some, it still had to have melody. It still had to have rhythm. It still had to have harmony. But for many, it no longer had to have any of those things. For me, music is, my definition changes daily, but for today, let's say, for me, music is sounds that are perceived to be pleasant or evocative. I'd like to include birds as being musical creatures, as being musicians. One of my heroes, another composer, Olivier Messiaen, felt even more strongly than I do about that. And he transcribed hundreds and hundreds of bird songs and used them in his music. And so some people would say organized sound. I think a lot of music is surely organized, and implicit in that is by human beings, you know. And certainly a lot of music is organized sound, but perhaps some music is not intentionally organized by either humans or other creatures.
Okay. It's
a wide open definition, I'm aware.
No, it's remarkable, and if you allow me,
yes,
I'm so intrigued. Let me engage that metaphor of what music is, according to John Cage, even more. Suppose that there was no audience, but only John Cage and the piano. What do you think would John Cage say?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, I'm not sure I have this story quite right, but I know that it's close. The essence of the story is accurate.
Close to it, yes.
John Cage was fascinated by truly experiencing silence. And none of his other pieces really went off in the direction of that piece to that extent. And then many of his pieces make very loud sounds and make sounds throughout with no hope of silence. But he was still fascinated by silence because he did an experiment. He put himself in a room that was supposedly soundproof. I've heard one version of the story that was a padded cell. And he spent a long time, I can't remember if it was 6 hours or 24 hours, but he spent a long time there attempting to experience absolute silence.
I see.
And he said that the longer that his experiment went, the noisier the experiment got. that the sound of his breathing became forte. It didn't get louder, but the relative situation made him much more aware of the sound of his breathing, and the sound of his heartbeat became louder and louder. And he began to detect very high-pitched sounds that he didn't know what they were. And he asked, people who understood the human body better than he did what he was hearing beyond his breathing and his heartbeat. And they said that, in fact, our electrical circuitry makes sounds that are audible if we're careful to listen. So in answer to your question, if he sat at the piano silently by himself, he would tell you that he would still hear quite a bit.
It's remarkable. I too have been fascinated because I'm a non-musician, but a student of philosophy with darkness. I'm still fascinated with darkness. I want to see things that I cannot see when it is dark. I wonder if that experience is similar to John Cage.
I think there's a relationship.
There is a relationship between the two. I have also heard an expression that says something like this, that the transcendent himself is music. I wonder if one way by which we can experience the transcendent as music is through silence. What do you think?
Well,
there is this image that I have of Coltrane towards the end of his life, I think, when he was doing Love Supreme.
Yes.
He had a tendency to always look up. I always wondered what he was looking at as he was looking up. It's as if he's responding to a calling, as if he's being summoned musically.
Well, again, we'll leave Cage, but John Cage, I think, would say silence is impossible as long as our ears are working. After many years of mulling this over, I think that's what he would say. I don't know, but that would be my guess. But in a completely different direction, I am fascinated by silence, perhaps first by John Cage's influences, but later by the influence of Asian music.
That's what I thought.
And specifically Japanese music. Japanese music is not the only music that celebrates silence, but it seems to be that Asian musics, it's wrong to speak in such general terms, and yet it seems that Asian musics have all explored silence in ways that most other musics have not. And Japanese music, which I know a little bit more about than the others, definitely has explored silence. It's explored silence to such a degree that there is a term. It's not just a musical term. It's a term that can be applied to almost all of the arts in Japan. The Japanese word is ma.
Okay.
And ma is considered, it's a philosophical concept, it's considered to be just as important as sound. One Japanese musician many centuries ago, I believe, said something along the lines of, ma is not there to frame the music, but the sound, the sounds are there to reveal the ma.
I see.
to reveal the silence. It's a concept that is relatively foreign to Euro-American sensibilities in music, because composers and I think performers often feel like if there's too much silence, that's not a good thing. They get nervous about the silence, like, oh my gosh, my audience will think I don't know what to do, or oh my gosh, my audience will think that I left something out of the composition. You know? Whereas large stretches of silence in Japanese music appear, and they are considered integral to the music, and they're not considered negative. The silence is considered, in fact, quite the opposite of negative. It's considered to be powerful, just as powerful as the sound. And this has influenced my work a lot.
Incredible. In fact, as you were speaking this way, an insight pervaded my soul. I began imagining you on a weekend after hard work at Berkeley. And then you go home. And then you enter one of your rooms where you have your musical instruments. In your case, I think it's fundamentally the piano. I imagine you further, like John Cage, sitting down without any notes, without any scales, without any chords in mind. But trying to compose something by merely listening to your body. I wonder if it is possible to compose something that way.
By listening to my body. That's a good idea. I haven't tried that. I certainly don't have to go to the piano or even go home to be composing. It's if I'm not engaged otherwise in a conversation or reading something, or if I'm left to my own devices, music just comes into my brain, and I have no choice but to entertain it.
You're quite right. So I'm asking this for the following reason. I was listening to this interview that Charlie Rose did with James Taylor 2 nights ago. He asked him, "How do you write songs?" He answered, "I don't write them. They come to me." I wonder if, analogically, the same principle holds to the practice of musical composition.
I think so.
And for that, correct me if I'm wrong, silence is a necessary and sufficient condition,
in fact,
for sounds to come to you in the form of musics. Very much like silence was a necessary and sufficient condition for James Taylor, by his own admission, for songs to come to him.
Yes. Silence is a wonderful thing. It's not a bad thing. People of all conditions and of all occupations and preoccupations, I think, should try it out more often.
So you think the German philosopher Heidegger, who was influenced by Japanese philosophy towards the end of his life,
yes,
condemned the modern milieu because it has not reserved space for silence.
Yes.
We are too busy.
And we are far more busy now than we were in his day.
It's that scene around Berkeley that I have in mind right now for composers like you who know the value of silence. I know it's advantageous for Berkeley to have located itself where it has, but I sometimes wonder if our musics would change if Berkeley was to be relocated in a very forested areas, silent.
Possibly.
What do you think?
Probably. Probably, yes. Yes. Is something, not to get off of that specific
it's quite
track,
all right.
but I guess we're going to come back to John Cage. This is going to end up being about John Cage to some
It's a
degree.
pleasure. It's so profound.
But he delivered a set of lectures at Harvard, and I was fortunate to be able to attend all of them.
I see.
6 lectures. And the lectures were works of art. They were performances, but they were followed up by question and answer sessions the following day in a completely different space. And though in those situations he was not performing, he was just a regular guy answering questions from the audience. He was so humble, so meek, so gentle. Gentle is the best word I can think of. And I remember one young man, perhaps a Harvard undergrad, getting up to one of the mics in the room. The room probably held 200 to 300 people. And he was angry. He was red in the face. He was as if transported from the 1940s, I suppose, with the people who were outraged with John Cage's music at that time. But this was in the, I think it was in the 80s. It was in the 80s or the 90s anyway. So he was telling John Cage, you know, how awful it was that he called his music music, that it wasn't music. It was obvious it wasn't music, and he just ranted and raved, you know. And when the young man finally finished, John Cage, I thought, wow, what is he going to say? You know, I mean, I know he's not going to be cruel, but what is he going to say?
What is he going to say?
And John Cage said, young man, I do sincerely hope for you that you will come to a place where you will learn what it means to simply listen. And that story came back into my head because really what silence gives us, what stopping our mouth, stopping the horns from honking, stopping the radio, stopping the television, stopping the computer. What affording yourself silence does is it creates the optimum situation for listening. I think all artists, not just composers, if they achieve anything remotely worthwhile, it's because they learned to listen.
Yes. Now, all this leads me to face your own work in 2 ways. I want to face it theoretically first, and then I want to face it musically.
Sure.
In this piece that you published, which, by the way, is beautifully written, that you sent to me, if it is your first draft, then you're really a gifted writer. It's beautifully done.
It's not my first draft.
I see. You make this provocative proposition, and you say that the world itself is made out of strings.
Well,
I was awestruck by that statement. First, I don't know what strings are, And secondly, I don't know why, just because there are strings, that the world is necessarily made out of them. I could imagine the possibility of strings being part of the world, but I couldn't, for the life of me, stretch the argument to the total proposition that the world itself is made out of strings.
The universe.
And the universe. And in that, correct me if I'm wrong, in that claim, you seem to be saying that strings precede language. Which is another way of saying that sound precedes words.
That sound precedes everything.
How so? Explain.
Well, I am the wrong person to explain this very well. And the statement that the world is, or the universe is made of strings is not mine. It comes from a theory, and we should underline the word theory. Comes from a theory in the world of physics. And there are, the first string theory, if I'm not mistaken, was I think in the 60s. It's called string theory. And since then, another theory called superstring theory has come about, and then another theory above and beyond is called M theory, which I know almost nothing about. But I became very fascinated. I'm fascinated by just learning. And I admit my biases when I latch on to something, especially. And my bias for string theory is that if in fact it's true, I'm certainly in one of the best of professions. Because if in fact string theory is true, then the universe is strings, and the universe is every single thing around us is sound. It's vibration.
I see.
You are vibration. These cups are vibration. This monitor is vibration, and these beautiful screens are vibration. So string theory is the latest, and string theory and its spin-offs are the latest and many think best hope for a unification theory. You know, quantum mechanics and gravity and relativity don't go together. They all work wonderfully separate from each other.
I see.
But they don't work
together.
They could have conflicts. Quantum theory has conflicts with gravity. Gravity has conflicts with relativity, et cetera, et cetera. So physicists, I'm pretty sure going all the way back to Einstein, wanted to solve these riddles, these anomalies in these great theories. They all seem to be absolutely on target, and yet they can't exist with each other. So a unification theory is a theory that tries to rectify this problem, and string theory is one of those. And what string theory says is that the smallest, absolute smallest thing, therefore the first and most fundamental building block of the universe, is billions of times smaller than any known proven particle. And it is a string, more precisely a loop. And that loop can, you know, a rubber band, perhaps, or yeah. But that has dimension and shape that a string, a building block string, would not have. But like a rubber band, or like a string that's been formed into a ring or into a loop, it can be folded and curled, and it can be stretched, or not stretched, but it can be like this, or it can be like this, or it can be like a figure eight. It can be infinitely shaped, right? So depending on the shape, and depending on, I suppose, the vibration itself, it's going to have different properties.
I see.
So string theory says that this is the holy grail of understanding the most fundamental essence of the universe. These strings that are billions of times smaller than anything we've studied so far. And if it's true, if this theory is true, then the universe is one amazing symphony.
And in that, what the professional musician does is listen to the universe. Hence, the importance of silence.
Yes.
For John Cage.
Yes.
I see. And now, I'm intrigued by something about the history of music. It's this, and I have to phrase this carefully. Why is it that when we talk about musical compositions, we singularly talk about European musicians only?
I love that question. Ask it again.
Why is it that when we speak about great composers, we're always listing, I think I'm right on this, almost each and every one of them, the so-called greats. I recently read a piece as I was preparing for this interview so that I can impress you. And then what I learned in a New York Times column, that a certain writer was asked to rank the greatest lexically. He began with Bach and he ended up with Brocken. 10 composers, and 10 of them are Europeans. I was dumbfounded by this.
Well, one of the issues is that in Europe, composers claimed their music, wrote their name on it. Later on, with the advent of copyright, they take it further and copyright their music. In most other traditions, the performance is at least as important or more important.
I see.
So, one of my favorite masterpieces of music is not European or from the United States. It's from Japan. It's a piece of music called Etenraku. There's no composer who claimed it. That doesn't mean it's not a masterpiece.
I see. Why did you claim it? Why did you claim it?
Why do I call it a masterpiece?
Yes. What criteria, what standards are you using to single it out as a masterpiece in its own right, in spite of its non-European extraction?
Yes. Well, let me share something that I share with students in one of my courses. Because that's not easy to answer. Let's play a foolish game. At least it's foolish in my mind.
Okay.
let's determine the greatest music in the world. We have these great composers listed, those 10, they're all from Europe. Let's prove that in fact they are the greatest. Or at least somebody from Europe is.
Let's stick to Bach.
Okay, let's stick
He's
to Bach.
ranked as the greatest.
Yes, let's stick to Bach. How is it that Bach is the greatest composer in the world? Well, for him to be the greatest composer in the world, we have to decide what makes music great. So on his behalf, let's decide that what makes music great is combining multiple melodies. If you combine multiple melodies that are different from each other, and as a result come up with some interesting vertical sonorities, which we call harmony, then Bach is certainly in the running for being the greatest composer in the world, because Bach combined multiple melodies.
I see.
He was very good at combining multiple melodies. I would say that there is not a single piece of his that has less than 2 melodies going simultaneously. And almost all European music, after the age of Gregorian chant, at that time, that wasn't multiple melodies, that was a single melody.
I see.
But after the medieval period, before the medieval period is over in Europe, composers have decided that the most fascinating thing to do with music is to have 2 or more simultaneous different melodies, which we now call counterpoint. Well, not only is Bach one of the best at doing it, but there's very few traditions around the world that even looked into that, other than Europeans.
I see.
So if the greatest music in the world is the music that combines multiple melodies and creates, as a result of that, harmonies that became accepted in Europe, then
Bach is the greatest.
Bach is one of the greatest, and virtually no one from any other part of the world is in the running. But who says, I'm talking to my students now, who says that the greatest music in the world plays by those rules? What if we established some different rules? What if we said the greatest music in the world is music which explores rhythm to the most sophisticated and deepest level possible? First of all, European composers would not do well at all if that was the parameter.
The criteria. Mm-hmm.
If that was the criteria.
Rhythm replaced multiple melodies.
Right.
Then
If we weren't
would
worried
not.
about melody,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not that the greatest rhythmic achievements don't include melody. They do.
They do.
Absolutely.
But
they
multiple
do.
melodies are not the paramount.
Right. What if what was paramount was finding amazingly sophisticated interweavings of rhythms? And again, not to take anything away from European rhythms, there are rhythms that are interesting in European music. But there are other cultures that take rhythm, take the development of rhythmic concepts far further than any European music.
Which leads me then to the following question. And of course, I'm not specializing in asking you difficult questions. I'm asking you this difficult questions because I sense that you like to think. So this is a thinking opportunity for me. We're thinking together.
Great.
I learned that you're profoundly interested in African drums.
Yes, I am.
Through the interest of which you developed an interest in what? Rhythms?
Well,
If that's what drew your attention to West African music?
actually, what drew my attention to West African music was my own formal education,
Okay.
or what was left out of it. I finished my degrees in music and did some postgraduate work in music, and before I'd even finished, it occurred to me that I had been asked to delve deeply into European music and somewhat into the music of the United States, the jazz, the rock, and so forth. I had not been asked to look even for a second at any of the music from any other part of the world, not from Africa, not from South America, not from India, not from East Asia. I had not been asked to even think one moment about any of that music.
In spite of your extensive knowledge of the musics that were mediated by what he called in that committee in which I worked with you, the silk, the silk.
The Silk Road.
The Silk Road.
Yes, yes. Yes, the Silk Road indeed. So a little voice in the back of my head said, we're not done. We're not done studying music. It's perhaps wrong to say we have a degree in music until we've studied a little bit more music. And, or I like to suggest that I change my degree to be not a Bachelor of Music degree, but my first degree, but a Bachelor of European Music degree, I think is a little more truthful.
I see.
In any case, when opportunity presented itself for me to study music outside of the European domain, I took it. The first opportunity I had to do that was with South Indian music. The next opportunity I had to do that was with West African music, with Ghanaian music. I know very little about Indian music. I know very little about Ghanaian music. But I know enough about both of those traditions to know that their repertoires are vast. And the musical achievements are every bit as, they deserve every bit as much notoriety as European music, which some of my colleagues find argumentative from their point of view, but that's all right.
And now I think the time has come for me to engage you musically. What I would like us to do is single out one or two of your compositions,
Okay.
and talk about them. I would like you to give me a crash course on what you're doing. So perhaps we can play one composition.
This is a recording that has many compositions other than mine.
Okay.
So if we are going to use this one, it will be track 11.
Okay.
This is not my composition.
This is not your...
It's a beautiful piece.
It's
A problem for me is in presenting a recording of the music is that music is, I'm not crazy about CD players or listening to music on an iPod, because to me music is a total experience, preferably as a performer. But if you're an audience member, seeing how the sounds are being produced is part of the excitement of what you're hearing. This piece is being played by an orchestra, but not a typical orchestra. It's being played by an orchestra of mandolins, guitars, and basses.
Okay.
With a little bit of percussion. And this section of it that we began with is very influenced by Japanese music. Long stretches of silence with little moments of sound, some of which are precisely transcribed bird songs. But then once the music begins to not have silence, it's no longer based solely on Japanese tradition, but also on Ghanaian tradition. The rhythms that you hear are from a Ghanaian masterpiece called Agbaja.
About which you learn by taking some intensive summer courses.
Yes.
About 3 times.
I studied 3 summers with a master drummer from Ghana who was here in the area.
Yeah.
And it was an incredible privilege to work with him. I certainly didn't master the material, but became acquainted with it and fell in love with it.
Okay. Well, this has been your host, Theodoros Kiros, for African Ascent. Thanks for staying with us.